Hello everyone, I am back in a Lotus for the first time in what feels like an absolute age. Now I'm here today in my friend James's Exige 430 to answer a few questions that you've been asking. And the first one is, when are you going to get another Lotus? I don't know. And the second is, what's going on with James's Lotus? Quite a bit is the short answer. I'm not going to go into that today because there's been quite a few things going on with the car and there's just no point talking about it right now because it is ongoing. So by the time I film this and release it, the situation probably would have changed anyway. So yeah, suffice it to say, he has been driving the car and largely enjoying driving it when he's got it, but that hasn't been as often as he'd like. So it's a very similar situation to when I had my Evora, but just being sat back in this thing for the first time in a while, and the first time in any small platform Lotus really since summer, it is a lovely place to be, if slightly noisy, so I apologize for the sort of higher than usual road roar and whatever on these videos, but I like to give you guys some scenery to look at, and you'll also notice that the video quality isn't quite the same as normal because I'm just using my action cams to this. I'm not using the big camera because, well, there's not really a lot of space to fit it in here with two grown adults as well. It is a small place. Anyone who's ever been in one of these will know what I'm talking about. However, the title topics are what's gone on with Lotus in the past and what's going to happen to Lotus in the future. Now, I should preface this with a very, very large disclaimer saying that, contrary to popular belief, Lotus and I don't really have an official relationship, and I have absolutely no idea what they're actually going to do. So every single thing that I'm about to say with regards to Lotus's future is complete guesswork on my part. Do not hold me to it. Do not think that because I've done a lot of Lotus stuff in the past, I've got any sort of, special connection at the factory or anything like that. My guess is as good as literally anybody else's. I've just been involved with them for a little while, and I appreciate my time with the marque has been short compared to some others. But I want to talk about what I think is the mistake or mistakes that they've been making over the past couple of years, and what they're going to do going forward, and how I hope they're going to proceed. Now, in the last few years, Lotus has dealt with being run on a very, very small budget. This is a case of necessity, and in order for the company to survive, things had to be done, cuts had to be made. There was no two ways around it. I don't especially hold that against them. They did it to survive. It's fine. It's happened to other companies. It happened to Porsche back in the 90s. They were literally at the end. They had to make some pretty big changes that a lot of people still whinge, whine and moan about today, but they let the company live and let them continue making some pretty brilliant cars. Now, my issue with Lotus is the fact that, you have a range of cars. It's not a big range. You get Elise, Exige and Evora, and granted, in the world, that isn't the case everywhere. If you're in the States, you've only got Evora. But the Evora always sat as the kind of more luxurious model, and I saw over the 2 years of Lotus ownership, Lotus on this sort of drive to basically kind of cut costs and cut corners where they could. And I always felt that was the wrong thing to be doing. The prices always went up, and it was just little things. It was not really anything big or major or silly. They weren't like massive spec changes. It's just stuff like, in the original press pictures of the car, the steering wheel on Evora had perforated leather on the sides. Lovely. Production cars didn't have that. Early cars had a nice metal expansion tank in the engine bay, which looked lovely and was clearly handmade by someone. It was a real piece of art, real bit of, mechanical stuff. It got replaced with a little plastic bottle. The door cards went from being all leather to half leather. And it's silly stuff like that. The covering in the boot, which actually, in one of my very, very first videos where I spoke about the things that I really, really love about my Evora, one of the things I picked up was the fact that in the boot, in the lid of the boot, you've got this leather. And then they changed it to just a piece of really cheap, nasty looking carpet, which can only have saved them at best, 20, 30 quid, something like that, on a car that costs list £80,000. And that just seemed to be a shame, because I always felt like when you buy a Lotus, it's the oddball choice, it's the weird choice. Lotus don't sell many cars. Last year, apparently, they sold 113 Evoras in Europe. I believe that includes the UK, not precisely sure, but that was a number quoted by Pistonheads. So, I always like the idea that when you're buying a small run car, stuff like that, that you get these little extras, the little nice things, that kind of just go the extra mile, and it does help offset the stuff like the, 25-year-old cheap as shit Vauxhall indicator stalks that they're using on this car, which costs over £100,000. That simply isn't cool. But a Lotus has never really been about frivolities and things. Certainly not for the smaller cars. It's been about the way that they perform and the way that they handle. And with it being 5 degrees out there, that's not what today's video is going to be about. Now, Lotus, rather than trying to make these cars more luxurious and more streetable and all that stuff, what they started doing with basically all of their models was introducing an increasingly large number and confusing number of lighter, more track-focused, more hardcore cars, which is kind of difficult when you're starting off with things like an Elise or an Exige to try and make it, lighter, more hardcore, more track-orientated. Now, I think Lotus have an image problem. It's not like a bad image problem, but generally people that aren't involved with them tend to think that they're all, super stiff, super uncomfortable, rattly, horrible little places to be that are really uncompromising and not friendly to drive. Actually, I'm driving the most hardcore Exige ever made, and this thing rides over this road better than my 996 C4S. It just does. It's an incredible car in that regard, and many others, but people don't see it that way, mostly because it's difficult to get in and out of, and it is difficult to get in and out of, trust me. Now, the thing is that's a perfectly fine route to go down with some cars, but I don't see the point in doing it across your entire range and doing stuff like they did with the Evora GT430, trying to take an Evora and then make it super lightweight, super hardcore, all this stuff. Just never made an awful lot of sense to me, because it was the wrong route to be going down, especially when you try and do that with your entire range. What you're trying to do is do the same thing with all of your cars, which means you're going to end up with them being essentially 3 different versions of the exact same thing. And a range should really be about variety. And they were paying increasingly large amounts of attention to these top-end, track-focused cars, and not to the base ones. And I sort of always felt that a base Evora 400, at the sort of just sub 80 grand you'd get for a reasonable spec one, was a fantastic alternative to a 911. And when it outperformed and outspec'd a base Carrera, and you could go toe-to-toe with a Carrera S in some cases, but for less money, I could make a good case for it. But when they started charging, GT3 money, it becomes much more difficult for me to make the case for it. Now, it'd be very easy to make the case for it if they were producing a car that was as quick as a GT3. Now, they might have done that, but I genuinely, hand on heart, couldn't tell you. I have a sneaking suspicion that if you compared this with, say, a 991.2 GT3, in most cases the Porsche would probably beat it on track. However, I cannot tell you with any degree of authority whatsoever. Lotus love publishing lap times. However, the lap times that they love publishing are from Hethel, their own circuit. And they only tend to compare it with their own cars. I would love to have seen, and I still would love to see, because there's no reason it can't be done, Lotus taking some of their cars, a trailer, a shitload of tyres, and one of their drivers, and they've got some excellent drivers that work for them, really proper world-class guys, go to somewhere like the Ring, or maybe not the Ring, because the Ring is a track that doesn't favour all cars, and I can perfectly accept the fact that perhaps a Lotus wouldn't do quite as well, something like this maybe wouldn't do quite as well around the Ring, but would show its hand to be much better around other circuits. So take it somewhere like Spa, somewhere like that, neutral ground, where you can put in some good lap times and show what the car's really made of, because I get a feeling it'd actually do pretty damn well. But this hasn't been done, and unfortunately the sort of opposite happens is that I've seen a lot of cases where magazines have taken these cars, put them around tracks and got times which, I don't know, when I've seen the video I haven't been impressed with how the car's been driven. Or I've actually seen some magazines where they've quoted a time, but the quoted time wasn't actually for the car that was being reviewed. So that's kind of an issue. You know, you've got people quoting, if you've got an article reviewing a car and you've got a thumping great big time posted there about here's how quickly this will get around the ring, and then in tiny little words saying, by the way, this was not actually this car, it was a different one, that's not right. So, you know, if you're gonna make a car about lap times and things, go get some proper times, or bring some other competitor cars to your own track and let other people drive them around and get some decent times in. There's lots of people out there that can do it. So if you're confident in your product, do it. And ultimately, I think it's a bit of a shame that that's kind of the route that they took, because, you know something, honestly, I didn't buy a Lotus to be the fastest thing out there. In fact, when I bought my Evora 400, it was, for the money, the slowest car of all of the cars that I drove. But it was the one that excited me the most and was the most fun to drive and just the most special feeling. It was a brilliant car, and still very much is. But there are reasons I got rid of that car, and if you want to know those, you can watch the video I did on that, and that's a separate issue. But, you know, a Lotus should be about the way it feels, the way it rides, the way it goes, and just trying to turn it into a focus on numbers is just not a battle that Lotus, with the resources they had, I think could have ever won. Plus, you've got a lot of people out there, and in America, unfortunately, they're very, very simple about how they like their cars. You look at the comments for a lot of my videos, Evora-related stuff, you get guys that just go, huh, what, 100 grand for something with only 400 horsepower? Like, well, I can get a Chevy instead with like 700 for that money. Like, yeah, that's kind of how they saw it. And actually, I've been on track with something like a Challenger Hellcat, for example, in an Evora, and you know, the Evora certainly holds its own despite a 300 horsepower deficit. That's largely in part to the fact that the guy in the Unos Roadster loves it. You know, so that's some of my thoughts on the mistakes Lotus has made in the past. I would like to see a return to this higher quality, more bespoke materials. If you want an idea of what I'm talking about, go and watch the recent video that Seen Through Glass did about Aston Martins. I think he called it I Became an Aston Martin Delivery Driver. That is the best video I've seen by any car YouTuber in ages. And it shows you just some of the stuff that Aston do. You know, the amount of work that goes into making just like one of their badges is insane. So that's what having an Aston is being about, and to a lesser extent, that should be what having a Lotus is about. It's an exclusive club. It should be special. It's a fun thing. It shouldn't just be about the numbers and about being the fastest, this, that, and the other, because people are just going to buy other things. I don't think that's what the Lotus experience is about. Now, Lotus's future, much more exciting and interesting, I find. As mentioned, I genuinely have not a Scooby about what is actually going to happen, but I suspect it's going to go something like this. I think the Evora is going to be the first to go. I know it's by far the youngest model in the lineup, but it's never been a sales success for Lotus, regardless of what they try and do with it. It just never has been. It's never really found its crowd. It's a great shame. Hey, look, I tried for 2.5 years to get people to buy them, and you know, that's just not going to work. Incidentally, if you're watching this video and wondering where my videos on new Lotus stuff are, I'm not going to be doing any for a little while for a few reasons. The main one being that actually this coming year, I'd really like to concentrate on doing videos of some older Lotus stuff. So if you've got an old Elise, an Esprit, or even some classic stuff, I'd love to review some of those, because the fact is that I've driven nearly all of the current Lotus range, barring the 410s, but I've driven the 430s and things, and the 400 and the 350 and all that stuff. So I don't like rehashing stuff where I you know, don't have to. So if you'd like to see me review your car and you've got something interesting, Lotus or not, drop me a line. It's talk@jayemm.com. The link is in the description below and on the about page on my YouTube. Anyway, Lotus's future. Evora's going to go first because it costs them a lot of money to build. They don't sell very many, and it's just, I think, a thorn in their side. So that's going to be gone. Next to go, I suspect then will be the Elise or the Exige, and they may even go at the same time. Now, what I really don't know and what I can't work out is what Lotus are going to introduce next. Now, it makes perfect sense for a new Elise to happen, because the Elise, whether I want it to or not, it is basically what Lotus have become known for in the last 20 odd years. So to just kill off that line doesn't make any sense. However, they've got to make it work in the near future. Now, they've got the platform to make it work, so they've got the architecture to make it work. It's gonna take some doing. It's gonna wind up being a heavier car. It's gonna wind up being a similar weight, about a ton, as the new Renault Alpine. It's probably gonna be a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. People ask me a lot about what engines Lotus are going to use going forwards. I don't believe they're going to stick with Toyota power plants. There's a very simple and unfortunate reason for that, and that is the fact that Geely, Lotus's new majority owners, are a Chinese company and Toyota are a Japanese company. And historically, the two cultures don't tend to get on that well together, so I think that's that really. Plus, Geely, big company, a lot of pride in what they're doing. They've invested an awful lot of money in Volvo, in Lotus, and in Mercedes. And I think, Lotus is probably going to be the halo for their brand, and they're going to want their own engine in it. This thing does shift, I tell you. Oh, I miss driving these things. But it is cold out there. I suppose that's the other thing I should mention, is that Lotus keep talking about how much these cars are really fast on track, and then insist on fitting an exhaust that's so loud you're not even allowed on track with them. So what's up with that? Like, just sell an exhaust people can use to go on track, they'll buy it. Anyhow, back to the future. So the Elise is going to have, I think, a 4-cylinder turbocharged 4-pot. That makes sense. Good tuning potential, small, lightweight power plant. They'll probably do what they did with the original Elise and nick it from a front-wheel drive car, probably something in the Volvo stable, something like that, and carry on as they can, but with something that hopefully can be sold globally. It doesn't make any sense to have a car that you can't sell around the world. I think the Americans would go crazy for it, and that just makes an awful lot of sense. The Exige is a more interesting question, because there's still a reason for the Exige to exist. However, the Exige for the last few years, since when V6, has been this weird kind of hybrid of half Elise, half Evora, and that's not how it started. It started off as a super hardcore version of the Elise with the same sort of power plants, and then it went supercharged and everything. But anyway, I think that might be where the Exige goes. Or Exige may then wind up being a completely different model line. It might then wind up bearing no relation to them at all. I certainly hope and I expect that the interiors and all the cars are going to be brought along, by the 20 odd years that they desperately need to be to feel modern and to work, essentially, and to sell to the kind of people that are going to buy these cars. I can expect some big shake-ups with dealers and things. It's very clear that Lotus are trying to move the brand up market. You can tell that from the way they've been pricing the cars of late, but as far as I'm concerned, dealers need to catch up with that. There's very, very few Lotus dealers out there that deal with customers in the way that you would expect a brand that charges 6 figures for a car. So that's going to happen, and that's how every single manufacturer works. There's standards about how dealers are run, and Lotus so far don't seem to be doing that. There's a lot of small things changing there as well, just little things like, Lotus are now doing, 3 years free servicing on cars. Small stuff like that is very much appreciated and is certainly going to help, but I think we're not going to see a massive change in the number of people buying these cars until you've got totally new models, and I think a lot more confidence in the brand. You can't change these things overnight. Just ask Alfa Romeo. It takes time to rebuild confidence in a brand, especially when it's a sort of big luxury one. Oh, Renault Sport Clio. I do like those. So that's going to happen. Now, I'd love to see a new Esprit. There's just been an announcement that Lotus are going to build some £2 million electric hypercar, which sensible money would say could probably just be a rebadged Neo EP9, because that is a Chinese-made electric hypercar, and that would kind of be obvious. And you're reversing in there, okay. So, that car already exists, so that's going to be a brand engineering exercise. I think, realistically speaking, that making a car like that is just almost pointless because it means nothing to Lotus's existing customers. You know, people buying an Elise at 40 grand are probably not in the market for a £2 million electric hypercar. Maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that the monthlies on that might be a touch higher than what they're paying now. I've also seen Lotus paying a lot of attention to monthly payments, things like that, finance, so they're evidently slowly learning the fact that that is how people buy cars now, and getting your monthly payments right and good is key to being able to sell cars, because they're basically all sold on finance now. That's just how it happens. So there's that. But what the powertrain in that will be, I couldn't say, because if you look at the Volvo catalogue, there's nothing obvious in there. Now, perhaps they're going to pinch something from Mercedes, but then they said they invested in Mercedes just for the electric tech that they had. But, you know, I wouldn't necessarily expect any big company to show their hand to the public quite so readily, so they've probably got other plans as well. In the meantime, though, these things are probably going to keep selling at the very, very slow rate that they have, and I think if you've bought a late model Evora or an Exige, if you can, it's probably worth holding on to them for a while, because whatever Lotus do, and I reiterate, I don't know. I really, really don't know. Maybe one day they'll decide to invite me down to the factory and tell me what they're doing, but that's not today. So until then, this is pure guesswork from a Lotus fan as to what's going to happen. But whatever comes out next, it's probably going to be great, because they do have a tendency, even in the toughest of times, to make pretty brilliant cars. And it seems pretty clear to me now that financially, things are as good at Hethel as they ever have been. They're in the strongest position they've been potentially in their history. So what's going to happen next, who can say? But I'm pretty sure whatever comes out of the factory next, it's not going to be what we're used to. And that Lotus SUV, I'm pretty sure that's a certain thing to happen. It's probably going to be a re-engineered Volvo, and that's fine. My dad just bought a Volvo. It's really good. So I'd like to see Lotus Vettel one of those, because Lotus have got a great history of Vetteling cars from other manufacturers and turning good cars into great cars, or even average cars into great cars. So long may that tradition continue, and I'd love to see them, you know, have a bit of fun with Volvo, and perhaps, you know, team up with Polestar to do some stuff and show them how to get the handling on cars right. But until then, your guess is as good as mine. I invite you to use the comment section on this video as a way of discussing what you think is going to happen, what's going to happen going forwards. And as I say again, if you want to see some Lotus content on this channel, for now, the best way to do that is to offer me your car for review if you'd like to. If you're not in the country, you know, I will be coming to the States at some point in 2019, and I do travel all over the place. So if you want to offer me something, but you know you're far away from me, offer it anyway, and you never know. Strange things can happen, especially where YouTube is concerned. For now, though, thanks to you guys for sticking with it, especially if you stuck to the end. Please hit the like button, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, because it does make a big difference to me and the channel. And I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.